My project, Dear Survivor, is a collaborative diptych project exploring what it means to cope and survive after sexual trauma. I wanted to build on the survivor autobiographical work that I've done in the past. In my experience, photography was a way for me to make sense of my own experience. And I believe that in order to survive, people have developed similar ways to empower themselves and cope. And through sharing these common threads, I hope to create safe spaces and community. I came up with Dear Survivor as a term of endearment and to welcome survivors in this fold. And I just like the collectiveness of that title. And it also can mean so many things as this project evolves and grows. I am working with the survivor community because I believe that we have to put a stop to gender violence. This is a community that is often shamed and kept in the dark. So I hope that in offering my experiences and tapping others who are willing to share, we can create spaces to eliminate shame and demand accountability from our society. I think that there are narratives about survivors that show them to be crippled by their trauma. I think that although this trauma has changed us for the rest of our lives, we have found ways to move forward. And I think that it is important for both the survivors and the community to see that. I believe that this is part of a more comprehensive narrative of survivors. I think it is important to challenge dominant narratives on survivors because dominant narratives can be harmful at times, especially when they're not thorough, if there's no complete buy-in in the community. And it's important to give a greater view of what is actually happening so people can understand the survivors. Many survivors are really simplified by statistics. Like we hear the statistics all the time, like this is how often it happens every 73 seconds. But like, what does that really mean? Like, I think it's really hard to quantify that until you actually see it. So hopefully like seeing a whole database of all these stories and not just an incident of what actually happened, and it's more like a fuller picture of how it has affected their lives. I hope that gives people a greater understanding of what it actually means. Healing can look like a lot of different things. It's not just one trajectory that somebody has to take. It's not like everybody has to go to therapy and do this and do that. Like, I think everybody has found a way to move forward and find healing in whatever that means to them. And I think that's really empowering for myself to see that, because I am also still healing, and I just seeing people in different stages really has helped me in my own journey, and I'm really honored to just be a part of this. I think the process of trying to be a little bit more experimental in this kind of storytelling and veer away from traditional photojournalism has been challenging, especially in the beginning. I think you have a very rigid mindset and there's very rigid rules and ethics to follow when you're doing a pretty straightforward photojournalistic story. Spending time with them and learning about their stories, I really understood that I couldn't tell their story without their involvement. In the beginning, I had these really big, lofty ideas of like, oh, I'm going to bring this work to schools, I'm going to bring it to hospitals. And over time, as I worked on this project as a survivor too, it was such a big feat to try to accomplish. And I realized that I needed to kind of scale it down to a more digestible community engagement project. So I kind of decided to focus on really, really small community, like within myself, within my family, within my community structure, like what can these people do? So this really gave the idea of maybe I should empower survivors to tell their stories individually in their own time. I'm not going to be able to, have time to spend time with every survivor out there. And if somebody wanted to take agency and do it for themselves, that's amazing. So that really brought about the workbook, and giving resources. And it also brought about the other resources that I made for this project, and how do you cultivate allies in your community? How do you start that conversation? I believe that art therapy really works. I think it's a way to really express ourselves and our experiences. And with trauma, I find that it's really hard to express yourself with words or express yourself verbally. So art really takes up a space where expression can be really open-ended, and I think that's why it works so much. And in my experience too, even just what I end up doing in these projects is I spend time with the survivors and we do art together. And it may be art that they always have done, or something new for them and new for me. And I think even in just this space of I'm just doing whatever feels good to me, and there's somebody right here who's doing the same thing, and there's no judgment at all. It just creates this sense of safety and peace, and a lot of acceptance, I think, for myself and for them. I hope that there's takeaways that can really take root and impact down the road. For my project, I'm offering an audio component to the survivor stories. So there will be an online platform that will have spaces for both survivors and allies to share their stories and find resources. I think it's important for me to create this safe space to foster community and support. I think this online platform will offer a lot of agency for survivors, so they can all each have their own page and have their art and have their stories on there. So it will really offer them a lot of ownership in their stories. And I think also I'm trying to expand this to a larger community to have more allies and build support there. So I also hope that there's kind of engagement on that aspect as well. My main goal is for survivors to know that they're not alone. I hope that there is comfort in community. I also want people to understand how prevalent gender violence is in our society, and in turn start important conversations. And these important conversations can also be a form of support for many survivors. So there are many resources available to support you, and I hope that ultimately everybody knows that they're not alone, and there is community out here. I think the really memorable parts of doing this kind of work is receiving a message that says they've broken their silence for the first time. And that has been really just impactful for me, that I'm sharing something that has changed my life forever, and it has impacted somebody in a good way. It's not just something that's horrible, and I think that's really when I feel that I've transformed this into something better, which is what I am hopefully trying to do in this whole process. Yeah, and I think, and one of the survivors I'm working with, she told me that it was one of the first times that she has ever told anybody that um, of the trauma that happened to her. And just being part of this project, is such a feat, and I'm so incredibly honored and proud of her. And just these moments where people move a little bit forward, it's just incredible. I think it's important for a survivor to tell this story. As a woman, there is a tenderness and sensitivity that I can offer, and people are much more comfortable with that, especially when they've experienced such immense trauma. And I think anything that really helps facilitate healing from trauma, and that can be your personality, whoever you are, is really, really helpful. And I hope that in sharing my journey and helping others in theirs and facilitating their process will create this community that I am really, really honing in on.